Welcome to my fine establishment. How may I be of service? Yes, the WRHMDs are head-mounted devices. That's what makes my particular bar so special. Here we provide the equipment to use virtual reality where, in a way, virtually anything is possible. They work using two small individual displays in the headset that help to create a full field of view. Along with the visuals, these headsets feature motion tracking in both the head and the eyes, creating a real-life feeling as you navigate the virtual room. This technology has not only become possible now due to advancements in frame rate and input lag. Before, when people would try the headsets like these, users would generally feel headaches or nausea due to the input lag. Oh, the virtual arcades in the 1960s. But not to worry, these headsets are brand new and ready to use. Are you interested in seeing what exactly is possible wearing these headsets? Well, why don't we have a look at see what these folks are doing right now. Oh my god. Goes to show how real it can actually feel in there. Just how far will games and entertainment go.
Membrane-enclosed passageway for transporting materials, such as the proteins synthesized by ribosomes. Proteins and other materials emerge from the endoplasmic reticulum in small vesicles, where the Golgi apparatus, sometimes called the Golgi body, receives them.
So what do you think? Pretty sweet, right? Still not convinced? Well, here, try listening to someone who's a little more qualified in the subject area. He can give you some additional information on the topic. And with me today we have Dan Safer, Assistant Professor at the Atlas Institute and the Computer Science of CU Boulder. Dan, first question, what exactly is VR, in your opinion?
That's a good question. So VR, virtual reality, we talk about this actually in my class a little bit, trying to come up with a definition, because there's really not necessarily a great standard one sentence definition of what it is. Usually you'll hear terms like presence or immersion sort of thrown around, but I mean, as best I could give it to you, it'll be sort of an artificial environment that is stimulating some subset of senses. So usually vision is probably the most common one, especially nowadays with different technologies coming out, but also sound. You can think about maybe some haptic feedback that you're getting. That basically allows you to sort of be in this artificial environment and sort of be present or be immersed in this environment, in this other sort of artificial environment.
So how big do you believe the market for VR is going to end up being?
I think as we go down and create better hardware, things that are sort of slightly less bulky. A lot of them today, things like the Oculus, you actually, there's a lot of wires you have to hook up for it. I think as we improve all those aspects, I think the market's going to be really big, just because there's so many different things you can do with them. It goes ranging from, again, things like games. I think a really interesting thing that people are going to have to look at is how you can make it a more social experience. Because right now, it's often difficult to think about how you would collaborate or work with other people or play with other people using these technologies today, just because they're not very good at that. It's usually more sort of a solo experience. And that's just for sort of games and entertainment, but again, there's uses in things like therapy. There's a ton of use for things, in different business, industry-related things like architecture, being able to sort of plan a building and walk through it before it's built. All sorts of different prototyping for technology where you can actually sort of build it and see what it would actually look like and how it would act before investing all the time and money in actually manufacturing it.
What do you see as the major functions that are going to come out of these head-mounted devices?
Sure. Yeah. So again, I think there's the possibility for therapy. There's industry uses, and usually that gets along this idea that we can either do telepresence, so you might be able to do virtual meetings, that type of thing, or you're doing some sort of prototyping where you're constructing a virtual object, some product, something like that, before having to actually manufacture it. So you can sort of see what the end result would be like. And then there's some educational uses for them as well. So there's been a little bit of work that's started to, examine what does education look like in virtual spaces, and is that effective? And it's almost kind of building off this idea of like MOOCs, where we have now, it's online classes, and where you can reach, so many more students and have them sort of learn simultaneously. So there's some interest in that, and some thought that maybe if we have these devices that allow us to more fully immerse ourselves into this environment, we can more closely mimic a classroom scenario, but on a larger scale. And then there's sort of just personal, recreational entertainment uses.
All right. So what challenges do you see VR coming up against in the next couple of years?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think there's sort of two sides of that. So one is sort of the technological hurdles and challenges, and the other is sort of the societal hurdles and challenges. So on the technology side, one of the big issues is sort of like I was alluding to before, bringing down sort of this discrepancy between your sort of physical motions and how this virtual environment is reacting to you. So you really want to have that be as tightly coupled loop as possible. And again, a lot of that is thinking about visuals. So how can we draw these graphics quickly enough such that when you're moving your head, it looks like you're actually moving through the space and you're not getting sick. And that's from a technological standpoint, it's a big hardware challenge to design hardware that can do this quickly enough. And there's also some software challenges in terms of there's some techniques where we can try to cleverly make predictions and sort of draw things quickly. So that sort of and then there's also this question of how can we make things more accessible? How can we make things more like wireless? How can we allow you to interact with your physical environment that you're actually in as well as the virtual? So there's some questions about like, if I'm completely immersed in this virtual environment, I'm walking around, how do I not like walk into my table or something like that, right? How do I trip over things? So there's some questions about that. How do we actually merge the two in a good way? And then there's questions about, right now there's a lot of questions about haptic feedback. So typically, the way you interact with these things is often used the form of like a wand, or like the HTC Vive has these sort of like hand controllers. So there's a question about how you actually interact with things in virtual space, and then is there a way to give good feedback? Can you touch virtual objects, things like that? There's a lot of research going on in that. So that's all sort of from a technology standpoint. And then from a society standpoint, there's a lot of sort of like the questions that you're raising today, which is, will this technology be acceptable? What are people really going to use it for? Are there possible downsides of this technology? Things like isolation, things like that. So, it really, I think, goes into this idea of acceptance. Will society accept this technology?
All right. So you talked briefly a little earlier about the nauseating effects from frame rate and lag potential. But do you know, or do you believe there are any other negative health effects that could potentially arise from VR?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So there's been some discussion about, so a lot of times the way these headsets work is there's a screen that's actually very close to your eyes. And then there's lenses that allow you to sort of magnify that and make it look like it's surrounding you. So there's some question about if you're staring at a screen so close in the front of your face, is that going to have negative impact on your vision? And to my knowledge, there hasn't really been any studies yet that have shown that is the case. But I think there's definitely sort of more research that should be done there. And is it going to cause it's sort of like that? What is it? There's moms always tell their kids like don't sit too close to the TV type of thing, right? So I think there needs to be probably a little bit more research on that to see like what are the long-term effects of this, and are there any problems from like a vision standpoint, things like that.
Right. That's something to be better understood later.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
All right. Well, just to wrap it up, what do you personally see as the future of virtual reality?
So I think we're at a really interesting point right now. So we saw, so VR technology has been around since the 50s. The sort of Damocles was that's sort of one of the first well-known ones that was made, and it was predicted even before that. So people were predicting almost kind of like the Matrix type of idea, or the holodeck, or something where you would have these sort of merging of computational technologies that would allow us to really almost create either physically or artificially these environments that can be purely sculpted around us. So we've had this technology for a long time. There was a big interest in it in the early 90s, mostly from game companies. People like Sega and Nintendo were interested in making virtual reality, but the hardware wasn't really there, the software wasn't really there, so it didn't really succeed. And that kind of killed like the buzz around virtual reality for basically till now, so a good sort of 15, 20 years. So now we're starting to see this resurgence of interest in it, and we're seeing so many different devices come out. Now we've the Oculus, the Gear VR, the Vive, the HoloLens, things like that. So I think it's really hard to predict whether, on one hand, maybe these will fail just like the earlier, in the early 90s, the technology failed, and people just weren't really accepting of it, and it just wasn't really, it didn't capture what people's idea of what the technology should be. And that's definitely possible. I think a lot of people are sort of thinking that maybe this technology has finally come of age. This is a story that's happened in other technology before too, right? So, Apple had the Newton, which was essentially a smartphone back in the early 90s, and then it never took off, right? But then, 10, 15 years later, the hardware had matured, software had matured, and people were actually able to see like how this device could help them. So I think that we might see a similar story here, where now this technology has really finally come of age, and people will start using it. I think there's a lot of excitement about it right now. So I would sort of probably lean more towards that side, just because I think seeing what people can do with it. There's also been, the landscape is different nowadays too. Nowadays we have much more of this sort of structure where people can make their own, and it's probably a lot from smartphones, people will make their own apps. People are making their own, modifications a lot more, things like Minecraft and whatever. So I think there's going to be this interesting shift where these developers are going to sort of push these devices out and almost sort of see what do people come up with, what do they want to do with it, what do they program on their own. So I think that'll be interesting to see. And I think that'll maybe give us a better chance of success because there's more minds sort of thinking about, what fun and interesting things can we do with this technology.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining me for my interview.
Yeah.
Now these headsets don't come cheap. HTC, for example, has their Vive VR priced at $800. But if you do end up picking up one for yourself, do be careful of overuse, especially with the effect social networking has already had on this world. People just seem more isolated these days, and the VR headset may only make things worse. But hey, you walked in? Care for a drink? Leaving already then? Well, alright. I hope it was at least of some help. Feel free to drop by anytime. Maybe actually order a drink next. Well, was that virtual or reality?